All right, very good. You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we're going to be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening, because we have as our guest somebody who understands the state of Illinois. He grew up in central Illinois. He came upstate, so to speak, as a teenager. He helped with the family when times were tough, and he was shining shoes. He didn't, like many people, go right out of high school into college. He went right out of high school into joining the Navy. He served stateside during the Gulf War. He then went to college at University of Illinois, Chicago campus. University of Illinois, Chicago, I guess they say now. UIC. Mm-hmm. John Marshall Law School, MBA then at UIC. That's right. Kane County Public Defender, 2 years as a public defender, then opened to private practice, then became a state senator. He's been a state senator for 6 years. He lives with his wife, Veronica, and 2 kids in Elgin. I'm talking, of course, about State Senator Michael Noland. Many of the Republicans would know the seat he represents was somebody they held near and dear. That is former State Senator Steve Rauschenberger. He didn't beat Steve Rauschenberger, at least not initially, because right. Mr. Rauschenberger right. decided to run for lieutenant governor on what I called, with some affection, the Gidberger ticket. That was Gidwitz running for governor and Steve Rauschenberger for lieutenant governor. Some affection, we don't take sides, but both of those guys came on the show a lot, once I think together. And I was just saying before the show, I'm easy, folks. It's not a matter of whether you're a Democrat or Republican, it's a matter of whether you've done public affairs. If you do public affairs like Michael Noland's doing, or as Dan Duffy has done, you're okay. It's a very simple test, right? Welcome to Public Affairs. Thank you so much for coming here.
Well, we've been wanting to do this for some time. I'm glad and privileged to be here.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
We're going to. That's enough for the pleasantries and the amenities. We're going to get right down to it. We're taping the show on June 27th, and we got to ask you, Mike Noland, if you were king,
what would you do? We don't have kings in Illinois or in the United States.
Well, we do have governors. Yeah. So you're a state senator. There are only 59 of them. It's an important position.
It's true.
You represent a large number of people out in the 22nd state.
200,000, more or less.
But if you were, say, governor, or if you were Senate President John Cullerton, right. you would have even more power. Or if you were Speaker Mike Madigan of the Illinois House. If you were one of those 3 people, as we call them, those 3 people, well, the 2 top leaders, and then with the Republican minority leaders, Radonio and Cross, known as the 4 tops.
That's right.
And then the governor, and the 4 tops. You know, they've been meeting. And some of the folks from the special committee of House and Senate folks who joined them.
Work group.
What I call them the GA, okay? Mm-hmm. So you take the 4 tops and the governor, Bill Brady, Sanger, Nekritz. Okay.
Myself.
You're part of that?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I omitted you inadvertently. I'm going to have to call it now the G9, okay?
Okay.
So this is even better. See, if you listen carefully on your show, when you're a show host, you can learn a lot. See, I didn't know this, and if I hadn't been listening to you, if somebody, for instance, had handed me questions and said, just read the questions and just keep going, and there was somebody with an earpiece, there are shows like that, folks, where the show host does not come up with the questions. I'm not going to say what they are, but on this show, the show host comes up with the questions.
And I can witness you're not rigged in any way.
We're not rigged? Okay. So you've got 9 people there, and that's a fair amount of influence. But now let's say you became the Senate President.
Just so you're aware, not at any one time necessarily.
Pardon?
But we're all participating in this.
Right. So those are 9 pretty influential people.
At different times.
Say you were the Senate President, say you were the Speaker, say you were the Governor, you would have even more influence over that. I'm giving you the power now, hypothetically. Tell me what you would do to make pension reform. What would pension reform legislation look like if you were the Governor and had more power than you have now? What would you want it to look like?
It would be structurally sound. And first of all, in all fairness to each one of these individuals that you name, they're oftentimes not as powerful as you might imagine. They are beholden to their membership, or they are at least answerable to their respective caucuses,
of course,
and governor to the people. And so we are all charged, even if we don't happen to be the governor or a minority or a majority leader. We answer to a constituency. What I would do for our people, and what I think is important to do, is to create stability I'd like to see us create a 30-year arc for our current pension system that is flattened out instead of having a ramp like we do now where we're having to pay more or increase payments over time, that we make more or less the same payments over time, that we spread the pain, so to speak, in order to make these payments, that everyone and all the stakeholders and the General Assembly, of course, and all of the different respective, like I say, constituencies, whether they happen to be General Assembly members, the judges, the teachers, or university professionals, or our state employees, that all of us share in the sacrifice and do what's right for the entire state. And that is probably to accept that there's going to be a change in the COLA, that's the cost of living adjustment. Also to increase perhaps the contribution by employees, and consider a change in what benefits are enjoyed by way of health care along the way and in retirement as well.
Okay. Now, as you know, some people think you can't just cut pension benefits. The Illinois Constitution talks about not diminishing the retirement. It talks about the pension program as being a contractual relationship between the people who receive the pension and the state of Illinois.
That is constitutionally protected. That's correct.
Some people think prospectively for non-accrued benefits, the state could just arbitrarily change the benefits. Others respectfully disagree and say that would be unconstitutional. And we may never know unless it's tested, and then we'll see what the Illinois Supreme Court says about it ultimately. But as part of dealing with that, the majority, which would be the Democrats in the House and the Senate, have said they would propose something so it would be negotiated and therefore, in their view, more constitutional. And the proposal is certain modifications will be proposed about the current employees or retirees or both.
That's right.
As to their pension benefits in exchange for what? That is, they will be allowed to continue to receive as retirees health care benefits. And if they reject the proposal, they may lose their retiree health care benefits. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
And they may not have their pensions calculated in a certain way to reflect salary increases that would otherwise be reflected in those future calculations.
Well,
we don't have to go into too much in the weeds, but the second one, I think, did I state it right, or am I a little bit
well, let's
off
be
on it?
clear. If they do not choose, and again, the main focus on the reforms that are proposed is choice. That is a threshold issue. Under the Illinois Constitution, as you state, these benefits are protected constitutionally. So,
and again, I'm not stating my view. My view doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just simply saying some people think that you don't have to negotiate it this way. Others think you do to be constitutional.
Right. So why have the fight?
I'm trying to present it fairly to the people out there.
No, absolutely.
The point is that the people in the majority said they are of the view that you have to be constitutional.
Right.
Propose a choice. Propose a negotiation, if you will.
Well, and
that's what we've outlined. The choice is, if you folks will accept these reductions in benefits, we will continue to give you retiree health care benefits at a certain cost, with a certain contribution, which previously wasn't the case, unrelated to this. Now, people who are retired have to pay a certain contribution to get those health care benefits. But if you take the modification, you have that choice available. If you don't take the modification, they're going to take away your retiree health care benefits. Am I right?
In theory, that's right.
Okay.
Or at least they will adjust them.
So we've set it up now, and you're saying if you were king, if you were governor, you would push hard. It sounds like that's my word, but you would push on the COLA modification.
That's
you would push on the
savings
retirement age increase. Is that right? And you would push.
No, not
you wouldn't
necessarily.
change. You wouldn't do the retirement increase.
No.
Quinn has proposed that, but you wouldn't do that.
Increase of the age.
You wouldn't. No. You wouldn't. I'm sorry. You wouldn't push to increase the retirement age, but you would push to have these people accept a lower COLA than currently is the case, right?
Once retired, yes, absolutely.
Once retired.
And then also,
and what about on the employee contribution? Would you expect you would ask for a higher employee contribution, both from current employees as well as from retirees who are no longer employees?
Well, contributions for current retirees. I would like to, as best we can.
Current retirees, people who are currently retired.
No,
because they're not paying. Employees. Only people who are employees are actually paying.
Current employees.
Okay. Right.
Okay. Who will retire sometime in the future.
So those two things is what those two things. One is a reduction in benefit. The other is an increase in their employee cost of the pension.
Contribution. That's
Contribution.
right. Into
Those
the
are the two major things you'd be proposing.
I would, in order to make the system sustainable,
Right,
we're
okay.
going to have to face those prospects. But at the same time, I think it's important for us to note that when we're providing the choice, we are providing an alternative to individuals who are currently expecting a certain annuity, a certain pension payment within
You're
the very near
saying,
term.
you said in another program with Carol Marine and in Chicago Tonight, we're taping this on June 27th.
Yeah.
Prior to this taping, you said on that program that a promise was made. That promise should be kept.
Right. And so what I
In
would
your view,
ask...
the promise was made by the state.
By the
they
state
should
of
keep.
Illinois, that's right.
Does that mean,
Especially
some would
for-
say, that sounds like you're saying that, look, people were promised certain pension benefits and they shouldn't be cut at all. But you're not saying that, so I'm confused.
Not entirely.
I'm
Not entirely.
confused.
That's
So when
fine.
you say promise should be kept, and yet you're proposing that these people accept, under some duress, you're proposing they accept a reduced benefit. So in what sense is the promise being kept?
I'm
Let me play
asking-
devil's advocate on behalf of now
Right.
the
Well, you're asking me
retirees.
again, if I'm the governor, if I'm the speaker, and if I can actually influence the outcome of this reform, I would ask that we hold harmless, we affect least those who are currently retired, those who are at least able to adjust their sales to the changing, the prevailing winds of our economy and our circumstances from a fiscal standpoint here in the state of Illinois. I would ask to hold them the least harmed in this whole process. Those who have more time, those who are newly hired,
Those who are
and
younger,
that's
more
part
time
of
to adjust.
Exactly, and I think that's fair.
So it's a
And I think
gradient,
most people,
it's a sliding scale of adjustment, but you are asking adjustments of people. You're not saying, we made a promise, we'll keep it no matter what. And they might
Well,
fairly come back to you and say,
understand.
you're not keeping your promise because you're asking us under some duress to give up some benefits.
I mean, not just in theory, but in actuality. Somebody
they
who was
do come back to
just
you. You're
who
right.
just who was just hired, let's say 3-4 years ago, who were not subject to the Tier 2 rigors, which was a reform in and of itself that we implemented. We voted on 2 years ago, as implemented here in January of 2011. They would have certain hollering rights to say, hey, listen, I was hired on, these were the promises, I expect this throughout the rest of my career. I don't think that that's actually possible at this point, and I think they understand that, and I think that they would be accepting of some
Well,
sacrifice here.
you could adopt from the Uniform Commercial Code. You're a lawyer. You probably remember 2615 of the Uniform Commercial Code.
Run it by me one more time.
Commercial impracticability. I think. I'm not a practicing lawyer anymore, so I'm doing
No,
this
that's
from
right,
memory.
I understand.
It actually was a big doctrine, just as a slight digression. Many years ago, there was a thing called the uranium cartel, and Westinghouse had sold a lot of uranium. They sold nuclear reactors, and they kind of used the fuel, the uranium, and said, we'll give you a low-price uranium to buy these reactors. I think I got that right. And in any case, so they sold a lot of low-price uranium, and it turns out the price of uranium went up. Some would say due to a cartel and otherwise. But the point is, they tried to renege on the contracts, and they invoked what was called commercial impracticability. 2615 of the Uniform Commercial Code. In a sense, you could say, here's an interesting idea for your lawyers on behalf of the state of Illinois, and you're a lawyer, so you understand this. You could say, the state of Illinois, and it sounded like you're almost saying this, it's not commercially practicable for the state of Illinois to adhere to its promises 100%. We can't do it. If we try to, you're not going to get any pensions. We'll go under. We'll become bankrupt. That's kind of what Westinghouse was saying. We can't keep these contracts to sell you the low-price uranium. We're going to have to adjust it up. And you're saying the same thing. We can't give you these benefits. We're going to have to adjust them down. Now, you're not going to court and saying that, but you're articulating it. Am I right? You
Yes,
see
to
the
a
kind
very
of
real
creative
extent,
things
but-
we get onto the show? I had not thought of using that at all. It's just from the free flow of conversation between Senator Mike Noland and Jeff Berkowitz.
Well, it's the impairment of contracts that you're referring to. And if it is something that is necessary and there's an important public purpose that is being satisfied in doing so, courts are understanding of
But in any
states
case-
or any jurisdiction, any government entities need to do so.
So we've outlined your general proposal, and you had a chance to vote for this. The state senate voted.
Well, be careful now. We didn't vote for a comprehensive bill.
No, but
It
you
was
did
a
have the
partial.
vote. You had a chance to say to vote on pension reform from from your leader, Senate President John Cullerton. I think was a sponsor of this.
That's right.
And it was only to 2 funds, not all 5, so you could say for that reason, and perhaps others, it wasn't comprehensive. But it had a modification of the COLA, a reduction of the COLA. It didn't change the retirement age. It didn't increase the employee contribution.
It allowed individuals to choose. That's true.
Right. If they want to keep their retirement health care benefits,
They wanted to keep the current COLA, okay? And
then they could
would
keep
lose-
the current. They would lose their
That's
retirement
right.
health care benefits.
That's right.
If they wanted to accept this modification, then they could keep then they could keep their retirement benefits,
That's right.
health care benefits. And you voted against that, right?
I did.
Now, 16.
I didn't vote against
16
it. I voted present, but I didn't vote for it. So
You
it's
didn't vote for
more
it.
or less the same thing.
Yeah,
That's
16 Democrats voted for it, 14
right.
Republicans voted for it. It passed the Senate. It didn't go to the House. It died. Well, it didn't die. It could go to the House sometime in the future. And if it went to the House and passed the House, and the governor signed it, it became law. But you voted against it, and you're saying because it wasn't comprehensive.
I voted present, and I did so to
Okay,
send
you
a
voted
message.
present because it wasn't comprehensive.
Right, and to send a message to both the Senate President and I'm a member of this work group, so you would think that I would have been supportive of a measure that it wasn't necessarily a product of the work group itself. Okay, so I want to make that clear as well.
But it is a bit of a compromise.
It was an initiative by the president, and it was not an initiative by both the president and the speaker, because obviously that bill was not called in the House. But I wanted to send the message that it's not done yet. It's not soup yet. We need to work on this more.
But President Cullerton, would just say to you, well, look, it covers 2 funds, it doesn't cover all 5. It's a start. Why don't you go along with us, Mike? We'll get there eventually.
Because
he must have said something like that to you when he spoke,
sure.
right?
And if you want to speak to the markets,
What's your answer to him if he says that?
The times require that we do something very comprehensive, that we take a
And he
look
says,
at
but
the...
start with me, Mike, go with me a little bit, and then we'll get there eventually. And what's your answer to that?
We need to force, in a sense, a vote on a comprehensive
If it
plan.
were all
as
5
opposed
funds
to,
instead of 2 funds, would you have then supported it?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
If this covered all 5 pension funds, not just 2, would you have then supported it?
No, because we're not holding the retirees harmless at this point. We're not
What do you mean
talking
holding
about
them harmless? What does that mean to hold them harmless?
Well, that is to make sure that they're not harmed moving forward. Those that are currently retired.
What would you do?
Somebody
What
who's
would you do?
80,
What would you
90
do to
years
hold
old
them
living on a
harmless?
fixed or limited income.
What would you do to hold them harmless? Tell me. What would you do?
I would try to scale out what contributions I would, as we talked about before, make a change in the COLA for
and you would
future
set out
retirees.
set out a
and then I would
structure of
also
payments to be made by the state going forward for the next
not
30
only
years.
state, and I would talk about cost shifting, which is
We'll
another
get to this
thing that
second.
these bills did not speak to.
Now, Bill Brady sat in that chair just a few weeks ago, and he said to me, Jeff, we'll do this reform. I think he voted for that legislation, and he said, we're going to pay over the next 30 years $200 billion, about $6 billion a year as a pension payment.
If we're lucky. Yeah.
Okay, so Bill said that. That's the structure he had in mind. If that were the structure, if they put that in writing, if they'd laid that out in detail?
Well, devil's always in the details.
No,
I'd
but
have to
if
see
they
it.
said that roughly, over the next 30 years, $6 billion a year comes out to almost $200 billion.
I'm thinking it's close to what's right.
That sounds like something you would support. You would like to see
I
that in
wanna
writing. You want to see that in writing.
Well,
You want to see the plan.
Not only do I want to
you want to
see
see
it in
the
writing.
plan, and
Yeah.
and you want to believe it's set in a way that could occur. It would be reasonably likely to occur.
And that it would be guaranteed.
It'd be guaranteed.
Yeah,
Okay. You want to see
that's another aspect of the bill that it was absent that I felt we needed to have as a part of the legislation.
And if that were done, if it were guaranteed, if it were laid out, then you would have supported it, and it applied to all 5 funds.
Well, I'd have to see the legislation,
But
but
that
in
sounds
principle,
like the
those
kind of
things that
thing-
you're mentioning right now are
That,
things
in
that
principle, you would
I
support that.
could probably, yeah, I think so.
And it was lacking
have to see it.
anything close to that caused you to vote
Well,
against it.
we need stability.
Okay.
We need to hold retirees harmless, as I say, and we need to keep our promises.
Okay.
And we need to make it so that the people of Illinois understand that the rest of the budget is not going to be so heavily impacted by our need to make this pension payment.
Now, we now understand your views about the pension. We now understand where you'd like to go, I think. And if our viewers were listening carefully, I think they would understand too. And so we applaud you for that.
Right.
Coming here, we appreciate that. Not everybody comes here. Not everybody says, I'm going to lay out a position. I know when you do that and you're running for office on November 6th, you put a target on. And I'm saying, you deserve some credit for being willing to tell the viewers and your potential voters
I appreciate
what
that.
it is you want
Right.
and what you would support
They
and what
need
you
to know
wouldn't.
where you stand. There's no doubt.
When you were in Chicago tonight, though, you did make some, what I would view as provocative statements. Maybe you didn't intend it that way. You said, we're taping this on the 27th, just prior to that, when you
Sure.
were in Chicago tonight with Carol Marine. You said, we have the 5th largest economy in the nation. We're about 50th in spending. There is a huge gap, I'm quoting, there is a huge gap between our willingness to pay and our capacity to pay, and we need to bridge that gap. That is a part of the solution. I assume you meant of the solution of the pension problem. That's an exact quote. Sound right from Mike
More or less,
Noland?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so I'm thinking, does that mean you think the state of Illinois should generate more tax revenue so the state of Illinois can spend more? Because you're saying we're 50th in spending. Illinois is 50th in spending. You want to be 5th in spending.
No, I don't. No.
Well, you want to be
Absolutely not.
you want to be somewhat higher than 50th.
We've been very conservative over time. I would want to maintain a conservative,
But you want to spend more.
fiscally
You want to spend
conservative.
more, and you want to tax more for the state of Illinois.
No.
What does that mean
the
to be?
state?
If you're 50th in spending, if the state, and there's a huge gap, and we need to bridge that gap, and you're complaining about our willingness to pay is not in par with our capacity to pay, it sounds to me like you're saying. It really sounds to me like you're saying you want to spend more as a state, you want to tax more as a state.
We need structural tax reform here in the state of Illinois. We need to create a fair tax system.
We'll get to the reform aspect in a minute, but spend a minute or two.
I'm trying to answer your question.
I know, but spend a minute or two. Do we need to get a larger amount of tax revenue from the state of Illinois, for the state of Illinois? Do we need to do that in your
We
view?
need to pay our bills.
Okay.
It would depend on whether or not we are actually answering the need for state services here in Illinois.
It sounds to me, though, like
and we
you're
may
saying,
have to do that.
okay,
We may
raise taxes again.
Depending on how you go about it. I'm not for increasing the income tax, if that's what you're referring to. I'm for abandoning our current income tax structure and moving to a more progressive, graduated system, perhaps looking at broadening our tax base, which is very important. And it's important wait a second now, it's important for people
Well, we
to
got about 8
understand.
minutes left, so
Well, that's
I'm
fine.
looking at the clock here.
I don't need an entire 8
Okay.
minutes to
Okay.
respond here. And that is to broaden our tax base, to consider services, to give manufacturing, for example, a little bit of a break here. You know, we have been a manufacturing economy. We've moved away from that. We're more so a service sector economy.
You want to tax
I want to
services.
start looking towards services. I want to also provide some property tax relief, especially for people who need it most. People in my district who are living on fixed and limited incomes.
Okay.
They're either getting priced out of their homes or they're getting
tax
taxed
Tell
out
me
of
the
their
services
homes.
you want to tax that we're not currently taxing.
Well, I'm an attorney. I would consider perhaps
Legal services should be
legal
taxed.
services,
Accounting
legal
services should be taxed.
Accounting,
Medical
architectural.
services should be taxed.
I'd be a little hesitant
You're
there.
not sure.
Okay, I want to make sure that food and medicine are readily available.
Bowling
widely
services should be
accessible to people.
taxed. Recreational services should be taxed.
You know, we could list-
Tanning services should be taxed.
Perhaps, yeah.
If
Yeah.
it moves, tax
But
it.
at the
Would that
same-
be your
no,
motto? If it
no,
moves, tax
absolutely
it?
not.
Because you're going to be
Absolutely
accused
not.
of that, Mike. And
Well, but
it's
now-
a fair accusation, and you should be able to
Services.
respond to it.
Let's talk about services in general, okay, as an area that we could look to. That is right to look to.
Haircuts.
Consider
Haircuts.
expanding.
If you pay
no.
$10 for a haircut,
Everything-
you're going to pay $11, right?
Right. I suppose everything except that. You certainly don't want to have your barber know that you want to do that when you're going to him for
What about
your next
financial
haircut.
transactions?
But,
Should they be
you know,
taxed too? Every financial
perhaps.
transaction?
Let's talk about it. Let's at least talk about it, Jeff. You know,
Does
I'm not
that
saying,
chase
you know,
industry away? Does it chase service providers away? If you could be in a state that doesn't tax services and be in one that does, what would be your choice? You would go somewhere else, right?
Not necessarily.
You think that's good
know,
for business?
In an economy such as we have, why did Boeing move here? Okay, why does Caterpillar stay here? Why does John Deere stay here? You know, why do some of the larger
but
corporations,
they're not
the
there.
Fortune
Those
500
corporate headquarters
corporations,
are here, but those are not. They're not doing the manufacturing here. They're not
Oh,
providing.
we have Caterpillar here.
Well,
we have John Deere
Boeing's
here.
not doing a lot of manufacturing in the state.
They know, but they hadn't to begin with.
Okay, no, but I'm just saying, but
you
there's a
never know.
difference
They-
between why you put a headquarters there.
But
and
we,
where you put-
Ford has just expanded here in the state of Illinois. They're manufacturing.
Financial centers
Why do
are-
they stay
but
here?
financial
Because
centers are
we
talking
have
about going away.
incredible services
No,
here.
but you hear this all the time.
But
Chicago Mercantile
we
Exchange. They can go to London. They can go all over. They can go somewhere in the United
But they
States that doesn't
choose to
tax them.
stay here in Illinois.
Well,
and why is
they
that?
may not. You want to go
Because we
right
are
up
the
to the
fifth
brink?
largest economy, and we have an incredibly integrated economy
you feeling
that
lucky, Mike?
provides great services by way of
It's that
transportation,
saying from
education,
Dirty
and
Harry,
healthcare.
you know? That saying for Dirty Harry, are you feeling lucky? Do you want to raise taxes on all these financial
I didn't
institutions?
say we necessarily had to raise taxes.
You
I'm
wanna
asking
look
for
at it.
a more fair tax
Do you think
system.
Okay. Do you want to tax people who make $1 million instead of 5% now?
I want to be less regressive.
Right now, they're taxed 5%. The guy who makes $50,000, the guy who makes $1 million, they're both taxed 5%. One guy pays
Well,
$2,500 in taxes. The other pays $50,000. He's paying a lot more, Mike. He's paying a lot more.
I challenge that assumption. I do.
$50,000 is not more than $2,500.
People of lower and
His
middle
income
income.
tax, he's paying a lot more income tax than
Come
he's
on
paying the
now,
other guy.
you want me to respond, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
People of lower and more moderate incomes are paying a higher portion of their household income than the people that you're mentioning, the far more affluent in other parts of the state. People in my district, trust me, people in my district don't fit the category that you're identifying there.
Okay, but you want to change, you want to amend the Illinois Constitution to allow a progressive income tax?
Yes.
Okay.
I would do that.
And then when you do that,
And in the process, I would provide 94% of the people of the state of Illinois a tax break. And I would also like to
Mike,
work.
did you look at this in Maryland? Because in Maryland, they adopted a progressive tax code, and the word is the millionaires left the state, okay? So you end up with less
Much
money.
smaller state.
You end up with less
provides
money.
less services. Does not have. Does not have.
You don't think the
I-90
millionaires can leave Illinois? They can leave Illinois because they can go to Florida. There are lots of places they can go.
But they'll choose not to because of the
Are you
robust
feeling
economy
lucky,
that we
Mike?
have
Because
here.
if you tax these people too much and they go away, you end up with less revenue, less services, and you're no longer the 5th largest economy. You may become the 10th largest economy. Are you afraid of that?
I'm not feeling lucky. I'm feeling logical. This
is very
something
logical. Money is very logical.
Yes.
Mike, if I get $1 million here, and right now I pay $50,000, and you want to double that from $50,000 to $100,000, it's enormously logical.
Those are assumptions.
It's enormously logical for me to say, Mike, I'm going to think about going to another state because I don't want to give you $100,000. I'm already giving you $50,000.
Sure.
And this guy who's making $50,000, he's only giving you $2,500.
Those are assumptions that will not necessarily bear themselves out.
Look at Maryland.
Under a
people
progressive
have looked
income
at this.
tax
Millionaires,
necessarily.
If you tax something, you get less of it. You've heard that phrase? If you tax something, you get less of it. If you lower the tax, you get more of it. If you want more wealth creators, lower the tax and you'll get more revenue. Right?
I do know this. When more money is circulating in our economy,
Mike.
There's economic growth.
Milton
and that's
Friedman,
good for
Capitalism
everyone.
and Freedom. Have you read this book?
Yeah, he's the man that said that there's no free lunch.
There ain't no such thing as free lunch, right?
That's right.
And if you get a progressive tax code, you're not getting a free lunch. Will you read this book?
You're giving it to me?
I'm giving
you
it to
darn
read.
right I will.
All right.
I've read parts of it already.
Okay, and you've
Thank
read.
you.
All right, we're going to continue to speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to thank our guest. Where's the camera? There it is.
Yeah.
I very much want to thank our guest, State Senator Mike Noland. You're a good sport, Mike.
It has been a
Thank you so
pleasure.
much for
Thank
coming
you,
on
Jeff.
and playing You Bet Your Life. All right, and we get the Noland. I've never got the cost of living adjustment. The cost of living adjustment that was proposed in the Senate. It was to be 3% or a half of the consumer price index, whichever is less.
Lesser of.
Whichever is less.
That's right.
Right now it's 3% across the board. No matter what happens to the cost of living, under the COLA you get 3% a year. Now, say the cost of living index may be 4%, and you get a half of that would be 2%. So you get 3 or 2, whichever is less, you get 2%, right?
Well,
and you voted against that. You voted against that.
It's 3% currently, compounded.
Right.
Okay?
This would be
We need to
simple.
move-
This would
that's
be
right.
simple. You're in favor of that, but you voted against this reform.
Well, I voted present. I could
But
possibly
you
vote
agreed
for
that
it
is voting no. That's the same as a no
for the
vote.
time
A present
being.
vote is
For
a
the
no
time
vote.
being. For the time being. It's not soup yet. Okay, we've got a lot of work to do.
And if that had passed for all 5 funds, does that take care of the $83 billion underfunding?
No, it takes care of about $11 billion. Okay.
So you got $70 billion more
that's
to
right.
find?
That's why we have to talk about the cost shift. Okay, we need to
That
talk
doesn't
about.
do much. That just puts the cost from one to the other.
No,
It doesn't
no.
do much.
But those who are actually setting the price.
But it's separate, Mike. Here's the thing.
It's much more efficient.
You know, the
Wait a
Republicans say
second.
Mike
That
Madigan.